Hello, I'm Novelette and welcome to Morgen Talk. My guest today is Herbert Wiggins, attorney at law for fair housing and bankruptcy with Hearthstone Legal Group. Hi, Herbert. How are you?
I'm fine. Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Please tell us about bankruptcy.
Well, bankruptcy is a legal process. It's a process that is written into the U.S. Constitution. So it's been part of our country since the Constitution. Basically, the founders of the country wanted this new United States to be different from continental Europe. Continental Europe, if you couldn't pay your debts, you would go to jail. It's called debtor's prison. So that was the same in England as well. So I think in the famous Charles Dickens story, A Christmas Carol, one of the characters, maybe Tiny Tim, his father isn't there for Christmas. It's because his father's in debtor's prison. So here in the United States, there is no debtor's prison. You're allowed to eliminate certain debts by legal process, and that process is called bankruptcy. You have to disclose all of your assets, disclose all of your debts. You go before a judge, you have an explanation of your situation, and depending upon certain facts that are present at that time, the judge can discharge or cancel your unsecured debt. So unsecured debt is debt that doesn't have collateral. So it's not a car payment, it's not a mortgage payment, but typically it's credit cards, hospital bills, loans from friends, loans that don't have collateral. Your mortgage still has to be paid, your car payment still has to be paid. If you don't pay them, then you can face the consequences, which are foreclosure or repossession. But bankruptcy can go a long way to relieving somebody of his or her debt. And bankruptcy can be either for an individual, it can be for a couple, it can be for one half of a couple, or it can be for a company. So they're all different forms of bankruptcy. So what I like to tell people is you start to get a sense pretty early on whether your debts are overwhelming you. I mean, if you're in a situation where month to month, you're having to decide whether you can pay your credit card or pay for your kids' tuition, pay your credit card or pay for your health insurance, pay your credit card or buy groceries. If you see that situation looming, then it's better to try to deal with it sooner rather than later. Bankruptcy doesn't work for everybody. For example, there's some people who may have a professional license, such as a CPA or a life insurance license or some other type of professional license where filing bankruptcy might cause some problem with the employer. Or there might be a situation in which you have a lot of equity in property, usually a house. If you have a lot of equity in your house, then bankruptcy could be very dangerous because, again, if you have property that has equity, it can be seized by the court and then used to pay part or all of your unsecured debt. And most people don't want to lose their home. Most people don't want to lose their primary transportation. So you have to be very careful of that. But, I tell people you have to take a very clear-eyed look at what your situation is. And if you see this situation developing, you should talk to somebody. Again, bankruptcy may not be appropriate for a particular person or for a couple. If a company files Chapter 7 bankruptcy, that company has to go out of business. Some companies are very large and they can file what's called a Chapter 11 business or Chapter 11 bankruptcy and stay in business. The LA Dodgers are a good example. The LA Dodgers are a baseball team, but they're also a company. And they filed bankruptcy a few years ago when their owner was a gentleman named Frank McCourt, and their star player was a fellow named Manny Ramirez. So that's a few years ago. But You know, the Dodgers did bankruptcy, the Chicago Tribune did bankruptcy, General Motors did bankruptcy, Reader's Digest. But when you have a big company, you're talking about a different type of bankruptcy. But for an individual, for a couple, for a company that's, say, a small to medium-sized company, you know when things are starting to get uncomfortable and you're having to make those very difficult choices between your life expenses and your debt. So the first step in filing bankruptcy is knowing that you have a difficult situation, knowing that it's something you probably can't handle on your own, and deciding to call somebody. You know, having a conversation with a bankruptcy attorney, such as me here at Hearthstone Legal Group, or with another attorney, and you can explore whether bankruptcy is appropriate. You can explore whether, you know, you can do all those things, whether it's going to be uncomfortable to do those things. You know, if you spent the last 6 months transferring your property to your relatives, bankruptcy may not be for you, because the bankruptcy court is going to undo all of those transfers and might declare that you're acting fraudulently. And you don't want a court calling you a fraud, because that's a very, very big problem, and it can even be considered a criminal offense in bankruptcy, and you don't want to go to jail as a result of your debt. So you need to speak with somebody, again, hopefully before the situation gets really dire, and explore whether that's appropriate. So as I said before, in the process, you're going to declare all of your assets, declare all of your debts. You're going to put those in a series of papers called schedules. That's a long set of documents, and those documents will be filed electronically with the court. And from there, you will have an audience in front of the trustee who's in charge of your property. The trustee will examine your papers. If necessary, the judge will also examine your papers. The creditors will be notified. Creditors will be given a chance to comment. Usually they don't, but sometimes they do, especially if there's an indication of fraud. And at that point, if there is no indication of fraud, the judge will grant a discharge for an individual or a company. And a discharge means that you're free of those debts. For a company, there is no discharge, but the debt basically is just canceled. I mean, the creditors can't pursue it once the case closes. But the individual or couple will get a discharge, and then you can get on with your life. Again, the mortgage survives, car note survives, unless you're willing to let those be foreclosed or repossessed. Most people don't want that to happen, and we would try very hard to prevent that from happening. But that's something we have to look at the very beginning of the case before we even go to court. Because as you step into court, now the court has jurisdiction over you. So we need to know the situation before that starts. You pay a small fee, or for some people it may not be small, but typically for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, it's a little over $300. You pay that to the court. Then you also have to pay your attorney up front. And normally a bankruptcy lasts anywhere from 3 to 6 months. 3 months might be a little on the shorter side. 6 months might be a little bit on the longer side, but that's generally the process. And then you go on with your life after that. There's no criminal liability. You're not shamed. You know, you don't have to disclose it to your neighbors. Only people you have to disclose it to are your creditors, the trustee, and the judge, and of course your attorney. And that's it.
Wow, okay, thank you. So then how common is bankruptcy filing amongst individuals and couples?
Well, it's very common. It's been a legal process for many years. During the Great Recession, there was a very, very large wave of bankruptcies. I mean, we know about the foreclosure crisis. A lot of people had to walk away from their homes, had to walk away from debts. So there was a very, very large spike in bankruptcies, say from 2008, 2009 to about 2012. There was a large spike in bankruptcies after the first Gulf War, between 1991 and 1993. It's rumored that there will be another large spike in bankruptcies beginning this year, and we don't really know what's going to happen with, excuse me, federal aid for people going forward, in this COVID pandemic. But I think there's a lot of unease, a lot of concern about, where the country is going financially. So that has a lot of people on edge, and a lot of people are having to explore their options, which include bankruptcy.
Okay. So then, considering how popular bankruptcy is in general, why is there still such a stigma against it? Why the shame, the guilt still so persistent?
Well, I mean, we're told that we have to be responsible for our liabilities. We have to pay our debts. We don't go, excuse me, we don't go to the department store and have a whole armful of clothes and then wave bye-bye to the cashier. That's called shoplifting. You have to pay for what you acquire. So, excuse me. So we're taught that we have to pay for our debt. So there are circumstances when, for one reason or another, that's not possible or plausible. Someone may become ill, lose a job, a dependent may become very sick, or for some other reason beyond our control, you may lose the ability to pay. And it's not a moral judgment. So it's one thing if you go to a casino and you gamble away lots of money, and then you come to court and say, well, I can't pay my debts. That's very different from somebody who loses a job because the company moved to another country, or because the company closed, or because you became disabled. That's a very different situation. So bankruptcy is designed for that type of situation where something is beyond your control and you need the safe harbor of that law. Again, people are not supposed to be punished for something that happens beyond their control. In fact, a few years ago, I remember reading the U.S. State Department. This would be in the early 2000s, encouraging entrepreneurs from Latin America to come to the United States. And part of the argument in encouraging those entrepreneurs to come to the U.S. and open businesses was that if it doesn't work out and the business goes under, the business can file bankruptcy and you can start a new business, which is true. You have to do certain things, but it is true. In some of those other countries, again, if you go bankrupt, you're considered personally liable and you may have to go to prison. So the State Department is making the point that come to the United States, open your business, create jobs, create commerce, and if for some reason things don't go well, you have the protection of the bankruptcy law and you can start another business. So that was the official pitch of the U.S. State Department in the early 2000s, encouraging entrepreneurs to come to America, come to the U.S. to do business, do commerce, and hire and grow the economy. I don't know if that's the same today.
All right. So what advice can you give anyone who's considering bankruptcy at the moment?
Well, I think the best advice is you need to speak with a bankruptcy attorney. Don't get your bankruptcy advice from reruns of The Sopranos. Don't get your bankruptcy advice from watching reruns of Beavis and Butthead. Don't get it from advertisements on the radio. You need to speak to an attorney. You'll hear the radio say, file bankruptcy and all your debts are gone. Not true. File bankruptcy and all your troubles are over. Probably not true. But depending upon your situation, bankruptcy can be a great relief. So I've had cases where We were able to wipe out all of the effective debt because the trustee could not foreclose on the home because of the home's debt structure, the mortgages, etc., and all the credit cards and all the hospital bills were discharged. So that's a great result for a client. That's not unusual. So in that particular case, the important things, the unsecured debt, all that went away. The person retained his or her job, kept paying on the house, and everything was great. Other situations, the debtor had a large amount of equity on the house, but still had to file bankruptcy. So we had to look for some ways to work around the fact that under many circumstances, the house would have been lost. But we were able to find another lender, pay off one mortgage, acquire another mortgage, eliminate the equity, pay off some of that debt to the trustee, and the debtor kept the home, which was the most important thing. So the more lead time we have, the more we can plan, the easier it is to come up with a solution that's going to, keep the debtor happy and eliminate a lot of that debt. But if it's a situation where someone wants to stop a foreclosure tomorrow, and they heard on The Sopranos that foreclosure can be prevented by bankruptcy, well, maybe, maybe not, but doing that the night before, doing that the weekend before is usually a bad idea. Haste makes waste. A lot of facts get overlooked. A lot of downstream effects occur. So the most important factor is, do as much as you can early, plan as much as you can early so that you're not putting yourself in that situation.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Oh, you're very welcome. I apologize for the frog in my throat. Thank you.